Every day, we are surrounded by ideas. We click, cram, swipe, skim. Indulging the impulse to consume, passively presume, or quickly dismiss. What could happen if we pause? To think deeply about what we believe and what it means for how we live. To ask questions, big questions, that might lead to a discovery that asks something of us. To share our personal beliefs, whether religious or not religious, and reach across difference with respect and curiosity, so we might listen and discern what's true.
What is the purpose of the universe?
What is the source of meaning?
Is Jesus relevant?
Is faith inherently irrational?
Is God necessary?
What difference does faith make?
Is belief
These are ideas that shape us. We're designed to wrestle with them, be changed by them, and seek truth. This journey isn't just an intellectual exercise. It requires all of who we are, our values, our experiences, our spiritual beliefs, and it's meant to be shared as we explore the ideas that shape our lives.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2025 Veritas Forum here at Pepperdine University. We're so glad to see all of you here in the audience. First, we'd like to thank all of our forum sponsors and partners. We have Chancellor Sarah Young Jackson, who has worked to found the Veritas Endowment, which has helped us plan this event each year. And we have the Hub for Spiritual Life and Student-Led Ministry Program, the Chapel Program, Interclub Council, and of course, your favorite that you're eating, Howdy's. My name's Madison Luke, and I'm the president for Veritas Club this year. But without further ado, I will start to introduce our speakers for tonight's event. But before that, if you are a student, can you please sign up with this Campus Group's QR code, because this is how we get funding for things like your delicious burritos. We track attendance. So if you're a student and have not signed up yet, please do so. First up, we have Dr. April Marshall. Dr. April Marshall is much beloved here at Pepperdine. She's the professor of Hispanic Studies, and she's formerly served as chairperson of International Studies and Language Division and senior associate dean of Seaver College. She's been to over 20 countries, and I've had the pleasure of studying abroad with her last summer in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And if you're a sophomore and going to DC next year, she'll be the faculty in residence. Dr. Marshall, would you like to take the stage? We also have, as you might know, our speaker, John Hendrix. So John Hendrix is a New York Times best-selling author and illustrator. His books include The Faithful Spy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and The Plot to Kill Hitler, which was called a best book of 2018 by NPR. He's also written Drawing is Magic, Discovering Yourself in a Sketchbook, Miracle Man, The Story of Jesus, and many others. His award-winning illustrations have appeared on book covers, jackets, newspapers, and magazines all over the world, including Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, Entertainment Weekly, Rolling Stone, The New Yorker, Esquire, The New York Times, and Time Magazine, The National Geographic, and Christianity Today. So clearly, his work is everywhere. And his collection, The Holy Ghost, a spirited comic with an introduction by Patrick McDonnell, was released in 2022. John's newest graphic novel, The Mythmakers, the remarkable fellowship of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, about the literary and spiritual friendship between Lewis and Tolkien, came out in 2024, and that is one of the focuses of tonight's talk. If you're interested in purchasing a copy, there's some in the foyer on your way out. John is the Distinguished Educator in the Arts for 2024 from the Society of Illustrators, and he is also the Kenneth E. Hudson Professor of Art. He's the founding chair of the MFA in Illustration and Visual Culture program at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. John, welcome to the stage.
I just want to point out that her applause was bigger than mine. I didn't know there was a home court advantage.
John, you're not giving grades to anybody in this room. So
That's a great point.
That could be the... welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Buen provecho means bon appetit with your howdies. Thank you so much. John and I are looking forward to this conversation and the evening together, the dialogue that we have. And we want you to be thinking about your questions and the way in which you want to engage with us as we talk together, because there'll be a time for question and response as well. So we're going to start with a brief introduction a little bit, and also just an exercise in thinking about friendship. So I'm going to talk about a word or an image that sort of symbolizes friendship for me to start. I'd love for you to think about that for yourself. A word or an image, a single word, an image that means friendship for you. I'm asking John to do the same. I'll share a little bit about my word, and then I'll pass the dialogue to John. He's going to share about his word or image, and then I also want John to introduce himself via this question. What about the relationship between Lewis and Tolkien inspired you? You see the novel, Mythmakers here, and I want to talk about that relationship and how friendship came to be meaningful to him by studying those two figures and their relationship. So I'll give you just a second to think about that word or image for yourself for friendship. And for me, the word is witness. Obviously, I had a heads up on the homework to think about the word. And the word is witness. And I say witness in so many ways. I'll just give a brief explanation and let John talk about his word or image. Witness in the sense of, I think in a true friendship, you're bearing witness to each other's lives. And all that means, right? You see one another, you walk with one another, you feel what the other feels. You are witness to their life in every way. And at the same time, they're a witness to your life. You know that someone is seeing you, hearing you, walking with you, and will bear witness to you with others as well. So witness would be the word that I'd use.
Yeah, it's a really tough question to boil it down into one word, right? I think probably the first thing you're thinking is like, how is this person qualified to talk about friendship? I am not a therapist. Guys, I'm a fraud, okay? I'm an artist. I like making comics. I like drawing. That's where I access all of the things that I like to think about and I like to read about is through images. And so a lot of the last 5 years I have spent thinking about friendship, and especially the word fellowship. And when we say fellowship in the context of Tolkien and Lewis, we tend to think of a particular fellowship and the things that they brought together in their journey and what that meant. So my word, I think, is steadfastness or long suffering, maybe. And maybe that sounds kind of like a bummer of a word for friendship. But the things I learned from Tolkien and Lewis was, first of all, you may not know the sort of history of their story. This is a graphic novel, okay? I sort of live in fear that there might be a real Tolkien or Lewis scholar in the audience. But I've read just like maybe 5 more books about them than you have, okay? But if you don't know the story, you know they wrote Narnia and Lord of the Rings. But they were not just friends. They were really like bros together. For like 25 years, they were the closest person in each other's life. And I think that really tells something about how their art was made and why their friendship was so important. In fact, I think we would not have Narnia or Middle-earth without their friendship. I think that's how important friendship was. And to me, that all came down to their steadfastness and their, in some ways, long suffering with each other. When you've had a friend a long time, you know exactly what that means. I've cut your mic so that, oh.
He wants all the applause. So let's get started with some big questions, all right? We're going to focus on 3 of those tonight. Here's the first one. Does being a Christian make you a better friend?
Yes, moving on. Well, I think we can all think of times when Our faith has bolstered those difficult moments in your life, right? And we can also think of times when maybe there is a hard moment, and as Christians, maybe we're a little too quick to suggest a Bible verse that would make it all better, or we're a little too fast to code it in the sovereignty of God, and we don't just sit and lament with one another. I think actually one of the things that, just reflecting about Tolkien and Lewis's friendship, what's really amazing about them is when they met, they had this incredible shared history. They both were in the trenches of World War I. I mean, really, they should not have escaped World War I together. This is the very first page of the book. It's a cold open of just about how they met. And it was at a faculty meeting. Lewis had, he was just a don. He was not a professor, but Tolkien was a professor. And when they meet, we know that this was an important meeting to them because Lewis recorded it in his diary. And he said, met Professor Tolkien today, a pale, fluent chap, no harm in him, only needs a smack or so. And that basically summarizes their entire friendship. But, okay, when they met, the equivalent of if you went into a meeting and somebody was wearing like a Wolverine t-shirt and you love Wolverine and you like walk over to them and you're like, oh my gosh, like let's talk about Wolverine. That's what they did. In this meeting, they talked about Norse mythology. And they basically just geeked out about Norse mythology because, of course, Tolkien had a reading club called the Coal Biters, where they read Norse mythology in Icelandic together. And he invited Lewis to join. Now, the key to this is that at this point in his life, his heart was really bitter. He had gone through the war. He was an atheist. He had seen the worst that humanity had to offer the world. But he had this weird tension in his heart. The things he loved the most in the world were imaginary. And so in his mind, he could not come up with any solution to the problem that anything that is real in the world is grim and meaningless. Anything that I love, like fairy stories, like the Norse myths, is imaginary. But Tolkien was a Catholic and gave him a lens to see the world in the right way. Scholar Alan Jacobs says, Tolkien did not convert Lewis. He allowed him to read the story the right way. And to me, that is what a Christian friendship can do. We give each other the ability to not just see Christianity as a collection of position papers, like, what do you think about whatever, fill in the culture war issue, right? But rather, what is the story? Because we are a story, and this is why Lewis loved the fairy tales.
John, would you repeat that quote again? The lens quote about the story the right way? We used to say that quote again?
Yes, he said he learned to read the human story the right way.
So thinking about that idea of witness, right? The way that can be interpreted through the Christian lens, and the witness to the story of Christ, of who we are as human beings, of what we're supposed to be to one another. I think that's a witness in the friendship there, right? Thinking about this question still, right? Does being a Christian make you a better friend? What other worldviews could we think about? Where else do we see the ideas of friendship, community, unity? It's not just in Christian theology or Christian perspectives, although the Bible, of course, gives us many examples about friendship, gives us many verses about friendship. We have Proverbs, we have Galatians, right? Bear one another's burdens in Galatians. But we also have examples or antithetical examples, right? We have Job and his friends. Right? Job might have needed some more support.
Maybe not the best example.
Right? But that's the opposite, perhaps. But what do you think other traditions might be able to offer us, John, in terms of the way to be a good friend?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go around that, and I'll get to it. So the problem is when I start talking about Tolkien and Lewis, it takes about 2 hours for me to get to any point. But one of the things I think the American church sometimes puts a lot of pressure on Christians to sort of turn every interaction into some kind of gospel message, or like there's a pressure to do that, or this feeling like, well, we've talked 3 times. I guess I should mention, our Lord and Savior at some point. And I tell my students this, like, if you had a friend that you like really loved, and you really loved hanging out with them, but man, every time you got with them, like within 5 minutes, the conversation always came back to like helicopters. You would be like, they're, like Dave's really nice, but it's just all about helicopters. And helicopters are great. But I think actually something we can look back to Lewis and Tolkien. After they met, Tolkien brought Lewis into his world, and they just had fun together. They enjoyed culture together. They had a shared fandom. And I think actually fandom or fan art is at the heart of what Narnia and Middle-earth are actually. They're actually just tributes to these bigger stories, these bigger ideas. And so eventually, well, like Lewis and Tolkien actually dressed up as polar bears once together. They went to it was not a fancy dress party. It was not a costume party. They just showed up in polar bear outfits. Again, so right, their friendship was based on a shared love, right? A community, right? And from that, an extension of things that they made together, right? So those are 2 things that I think actually can come back to what we can take from any faith tradition is how important community is. Because what religion is a way to have community outside of your blood family, right? And so it's something I say to I lead a graduate program, and artists often get told when they're young that you need to be careful of other artists. They'll steal your ideas, or they'll pollute your ideas so that they're not as good, right? And that is a false liturgy. Our work always gets better in community. Not sometimes, always. And so retreating from community makes you and your work less. And so you have to let go of the idea that there is something that others will corrupt or steal or pollute, especially inside the arts. I think it applies to almost anyone at your age. But especially in the arts, there can be a temptation to isolate and to become the tortured genius that our culture tells you that you have to be if you want to be a great artist, student, engineer, whatever.
Thank you. You came back around to it.
I got it?
I think
Okay,
so.
all right,
I
thank
think so. And to build off of that, I'll say I think you're absolutely correct about community and unity, which you mentioned. Unity is part of many faith traditions, and friendship is sort of our effort to create unity with others, those like us and those not necessarily like us. So I think that striving for unity and community is part of the Christian tradition, but part of other traditions as well. All right, ready for big question number 2? What do you think? Okay, thank you. Why not? What does it look like to be a responsible or accountable friend? We talk a lot about accountability. I hear that term a whole lot. In a friendship, what does that mean? What do we do? How do we embody accountability in a friendship, John?
Well, I don't want to spoil this book for you, but no, the amazing story about Lewis and Tolkien is that they had this rich fellowship for so many years where they had this reading group called the Inklings. They would come together they met twice a week. This is one thing that everyone should take away from friendship is you have to be intentional and you have to have things that you stick to and you plan and you don't like flake out on. And so they met twice a week, 11 a.m. on Tuesdays. They met at the pub at Eagle and Child. So, okay, number 1, have beers at 11 a.m. apparently. No, I'm sorry, don't do that. And then the second time they met was Thursday night at Magdalen College in Lewis's quarters, and that's where they read to one another, right? This is where they really were vulnerable. They would bring things in that were not finished, and they would read them aloud. And Warnie Lewis, which was C.S. Lewis's brother, who was also part of the Inklings, said that to read before the Inklings was to face a howitzer with a pea shooter because they were really honest. Like, this was not the Mutual Admiration Society. They really put your piece through the ringer. And so I think a good friend, when there is trust, when there is safety, can be honest and can really, when you have that connection, when you have that trust with one another, can say things that are sometimes difficult. And in fact, that is one of the reasons why towards the end of their life, after 25 years together, their friendship began to deteriorate. It began to decay and dim. And partially, they lost the ability to be honest with each other. Lewis got married to Joy Davidman and did not even tell Tolkien that this was happening because he feared that maybe Tolkien would be mad about that because Joy had been divorced from her husband who had been abusive. And so they were not being honest with one another. And so that accountability, that friendship, that is where the rift really came in their friendship. And really they died without having that fully resolved. And you see it in Tolkien's letters that Lewis died, he was ill, but it was kind of a very sudden death, and Tolkien was gutted by it. And he said in one of his final letters that Lewis's death had been an axe blow to the roots of his life. And I think he died with many regrets about things he was never able to say to C.S. Lewis.
Do you want to talk about the image at all there, John?
Oh, well, so in this book, I picked these two characters at random, a lion and a wizard. Totally random.
Totally random.
Now, one of the phenomenons of making a graphic novel, which is what I do, the Inklings don't do anything. They sit and talk, mostly at the Eagle and Child and at Magdalen College. That's it. There's really nothing that happens. Okay, so a 13-year-old, which these books are for middle grade, I think my ideal audience is actually like a 13-year-old who's been assigned Beowulf and hates it. And I want to tell them that, like, no, the Beowulf has everything to do with, like, the Avengers. You just have to keep reading. But yes, nobody's going to read a graphic novel about well, I would, but most people need a little more action. So I invented these two protagonists, lion and wizard, and they act as avatars in the book to help guide you through the story a little bit. And then they get to do some of the things that Lewis and Tolkien are writing about. So in this book, we have these two parallel friendships that are running at the same time. We're learning about Tolkien and Lewis's ups and downs. And then we also have Lion and Wizard, who are kind of an odd couple. I mean, one's kind of a bumbling marble mouth, and then the other is this brash kind of always wrecking things. And so they get on these adventures together, and it's a way actually to bridge kind of the narrative gap of how you get someone to learn about both mythology and tell their biography at the same time.
Thank you. I'm going to pop back to that big question number 2. And just to let you know, I think big question number 2 is also related to big question number 1. And John mentioned trust and vulnerability in this accountability piece. And I think that thinking about being a Christian and a friendship, I think part of friendship is a sacredness, right? That you're living with someone else, right? Living alongside them, living in their moments of highs and lows, their joys, their sorrows. And you have this vulnerability and you have this trust. And you talked about shared things, whether they be joys or adventures, like with the avatars you use in your book. And you share those things because you trust the other person in this relationship. And that trust is sacred. And you talked about what that looks like when it's broken, right? For Lewis and Tolkien and what that meant and regrets. And I think accountability is very important, connected to this idea of sacredness, right? Because you're holding something sacred for another person.
Well, and to relate it, one quick story from the reading groups. There was one member of the group, Hugo Dyson, actually was very instrumental in Lewis coming to faith. But he was also just a real kind of crank. And he hated Lord of the Rings, okay? So he's in this reading group for Tolkien took 17 years to write Lord of the Rings. So by the end of this, Hugo Dyson cannot take it. And so Tollers pulls out the manuscript he's going to read that night, and he flops onto the couch and says, "Oh God, more elves." And Tolkien was really, really hurt, really hurt by it, and was like, "No, I'm not going to do this." And Lewis stepped in and was like, No, Hugo, you're out of order. Tollers, you're going to read this right now. And, protected him from that embarrassment and said, "No, we're all in this with you." And in fact, it's something I had to cut from the book for time, but even after Tolkien and Lewis were dimming, their friendship was dimming, Tolkien basically went out of his way to make sure that Lewis could finally get his chair, which to be a full professor, because Oxford had looked over him for years, mostly because he wrote popular books. That was the number one sin of a scholar at the time. You cannot be popular. And Tolkien thought this rightfully was a real tragedy. And he went and helped Lewis get a chair at Cambridge, at Magdalen College in Cambridge. So his last few years of teaching was really a chair that Tolkien had been instrumental in providing.
John, while we're on this question, let's think about the big title we have for the talk, which is, what do you think we get wrong about friendship? What do we get wrong about being responsible or accountable or trust? Because we get stuff wrong, right? We've all been in friendships where it doesn't go the way we hope. We've all been in friendships where there's brokenness. We've all been in friendships when we feel like trust has been broken, or someone hasn't seen us or heard us. Or like the moment you just described, someone did see us and hear us and didn't honor us, didn't feel like that was sacred enough, right? Judged us. So what do we get wrong about friendship?
Well, I think it's good to think about the paradigm of what you live in. We're all inside a particular moment. We live in a very individualistic society. Let's just imagine you told your parents you're moving across the country for a new job in New York City. What would they say? It would be like, wow, what a great choice. That's amazing. Congratulations. Now, replace that conversation with, I'm moving to New York City because I have some really good friends there that are really special to me, and we have a deep fellowship, and it's really important as a human being to have deep fellowship. They would think, that's not a good idea, right? We do not normalize making choices to prioritize friendship. It's actually seen as a kind of bonus. It's not the real story. And unfortunately, the Bible just tells a very different story about that. And that basically this is the reason why the church exists. And in fact, a previous book of mine, The Faithful Spy, about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was obsessed with this idea of the other, and that Christ is only present when there is another with you, right? And so that the church is the literal Christness in the world. And so his whole life, his whole ministry, his whole sacrifice was about otherness, right? And that is where Christ is present. So I just think even in your mind saying that making choices to prioritize fellowship, especially if you have a group of friends that is special, and I think we know when we're in those. I mean, you guys may be in friendships right now that you will know for the rest of your life, right? And those are real gifts.
And I think you hit a very important point earlier about being conscientious, making an effort, being sure to be present, but planning that, right? There's spontaneous moments in friendship as well, but that they held these meetings, that they knew they were going to be together and engage with one another, and had that to look forward to, had that to be accountable with, and spent that time together. That time is a huge element of friendship, I think.
Well, and you're in the season right now in college where friendships are your family in many ways, and that's awesome. You have lots of time to spend together. And in some ways, the challenge of friendship comes in your 30s and your 40s when you have children and demands of work and family and all these other things, and still prioritizing friends, and not just as like, let's go and hit 18, like let's sit down around a fire and really catch up, and be intentional in each other's lives. That takes a lot of discipline the older you get.
Big question number 3. Are we ready? What do you think? Let's do it.
We're flying through this. I think we're going to be done early.
We're on time, John. We're on time.
I'm sorry.
All right. What is the connection between friendship and other kinds of relationships? For instance, romantic relationships. And you sort of started to lead us into this, thinking about family and transitions in life. So how are ships, if you will, related?
I just am imagining my children sitting in the audience thinking that I'm giving relationship advice. So funny. So I met my wife in high school, and right, it sounds so awesome. It was amazing from the moment we met, right? No, we broke up 3 times. I broke up with her on Christmas.
Oh.
I know, guys.
That's it, John.
I know. I didn't plan it. You know, it's just one of those organic conversations. Anyway. Okay.
No gifts. No gifts.
Oh, it was after we did the gift exchange. And she said she knew later. She was like, I knew you were going to break up with me because the gift was so bad. But we've been married 25 years. So, okay, here's what I'm going to say. Life, thank you. Yes.
Applause.
Yeah, I have come to learn this lesson over and over. I'm no expert in relationships, but I am an expert in graphic novels. Graphic novels are a mess, okay? They are a mess from beginning to end. Everyone asks me, what do you write first, the words or the pictures? And I'm like, yes. I don't know. I don't know how it happens. And every day I'm in the middle, like this project, Mythmakers, was 5 years in the making. And every day I would wake up and be like, this isn't working. Like, it's not working. I've now put 3 years into this. It's not working. And relationships sometimes feel like that. It feels like a mess every day sometimes. But again, that long suffering, that steadfastness, that is the point of it, really, right? It's not just to like, I feel great today, but a commitment. We see this in Lewis and Tolkien. They were committed to one another, and that meant everything, really, for the long suffering of their friendship.
Do you want to comment on this image?
Oh, well, this is a cutaway image from Eagle and Child. This is Lewis walking in with a bundle of papers, halfway probably between, various administrative duties or meetings he's skipping out on, dropping into the Eagle and Child, which it was their famous pub that is still there in Oxford today. Bird and Baby is what they called it. It is currently closed, and no one exactly knows what is going on. I think it's going to be renovated, and just everyone is hoping it's not going to be gutted on the inside. But if you walk through Eagle and Child, in the very back was the rabbit room, and it's a wonderful, cozy little room with a fireplace where they always did their hangouts. And here we have some of the regular characters from the early Inklings meetings.
So we're going to go back to that big question number 3. And John and I have the blessing of having very different perspectives on this because I'm unmarried and I don't have children. And so you think about the ships and friendship and relationships. And so I think part of what I've learned through friendship is the way in which friendship translates to my familial relationships. I think I'm a better sister. I think I'm a better daughter. I think I'm a better aunt. I think I'm a better cousin because I practice in those relationships what I practice in my friendships. And I think it's the same building blocks that we've talked about: trust, accountability, sharing, being there. I have to be very conscientious because I live here in California, and you may have noticed that I don't sound like I'm from California, perhaps. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, and so I don't have any family here in California. And I have to remember the time difference, right? 3 hours, which is just enough to be like, oh, they're eating dinner. Oh, they're going to bed. Oh, they're... And so this point of being conscientious, we have all kinds of technology now, which is very helpful with that, honestly. Being able to see someone, I mean, a phone call was great, but now I can look at my niece and nephew. I can look at my parents. They can look at me. And I can't tell you how many times it's been wonderful to say, oh, I want to show you something, and be able to say, here's this picture or this thing, or look at this or that. And those moments, they add up over time. And I think that's what I'd say about relationships in general, is that they're cumulative. And even when we get it wrong, we have this accumulation of moments when we've got it right. We have this trust, we have this sacredness, and we have this notion, at least in the Christian worldview, that we're going to forgive one another. But we also have these other things that we've accumulated and we can lean back into. We can remember why this person is dear to us. We can remember how they've supported us. We can remember who they've been to us, and they can remember who we've been to them. And so I think practicing friendship is always abundance, whether it be with my family, whether it be in a romantic setting. It's a practice of abundance. And and I think all these qualities you bring or skill sets you bring, they transfer very easily. What would you say, John?
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, the image of the cup running over, right? That is a really countercultural image that God gives us. Like, imagine the most expensive wine in the world, and you fill it up to the brim, and then God just keeps on pouring, and it's just spilling onto the ground. And you're like, bro, hey, whoa, 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 that's expensive. And he's like, nope, it is the lavishness of love. That is a really good thing. Yeah, it's really good advice. And going back to Lewis and Tolkien, just a small story from their life. Like, they were British men. They did not talk about their feelings, right? This was kind of a debt they were kicking down the road until the bill came due in their relationship. Like, for instance, it took Tolkien 17 years to write Lord of the Rings. Basically, he wrote one single story his whole life that involves The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion, which was never published in his life. Lewis wrote all 7 Narnia books in 7 years. Lewis would basically, on the first draft, write something that would become a bestseller. He became literally Lewis became literally a hero of Britain in the war, doing these radio talks, trying to talk about God and what eventually became mere Christianity, right? So Tolkien was like one of those friends that's like, good job you, but also like, man, what are you doing? He did, as a Catholic, he thought it was crazy that Lewis could just write a book of theology without going to seminary. He thought that was wildly irresponsible. Like, Lewis dedicated Screwtape Letters to Tolkien. He never understood why. He thought that book was super weird and was speculative. And, he hated Father Christmas in Narnia, right? Look, Tolkien hated Narnia. But what I tell people is Tolkien hated everything. So it doesn't matter that he hated Narnia. This was just his mindset on the world. Okay, that was all preamble to say, when Lewis fell in love with Joy Davidman, Lewis knew deep down Tolkien was skeptical about the things he had been doing. He was skeptical about his theological positions that he took in miracles. He was skeptical about the idea that someone could remarry a woman who was divorced, even a woman who had been divorced from an abusive husband. And so Lewis, not wanting to hurt him or to bring something up that would be uncomfortable, just didn't tell him, right? And probably was like, this will work itself out. Well, he got married, and Tolkien found out from a friend that Lewis had gotten married. This broke Tolkien's heart, right? Like, not just that you married a woman who's divorced, but that you didn't tell me, right? That was the big breach of honesty between them that I think really sent them down the path where they could never have the same fellowship that they did before that moment. And all of that, I think, was an accumulation of, you kind of, some of your friends, you have like friends, and then you have like some that are like frenemy friends. You're like, yeah, we hang out, but like sometimes I just wish they wouldn't do so well at everything. And I think actually Tolkien kind of transitioned into that a little bit, and the bitterness and the jealousy of that kind of got the better of him. But yeah, I mean, in some ways, it can be a sad story if you read it that way. In my book, I give them a chance to maybe say the truth that they believed, and that is that this is not our home. And I think that's really good to remember. The new earth, that is the wildest thing the Bible has ever come up with. And we have to remember that every day. And Tolkien had this word for what he loved about stories. Don't worry, I've got only 30 minutes more on this topic. He called it the eucatastrophe. He said all good stories have it, and it's basically the anti-catastrophe. And in fact, one of the criticisms of Lord of the Rings, if you've read it, is that they're all over the place. Like, Gandalf comes on the 3rd day at Helm's Deep. The eagles come to save Sam and Frodo. It's the idea that when things are at their darkest and there is no hope left, something happens and hope is back. And of course, Tolkien was obsessed about this because to him, the text of the eucatastrophe was Easter. And so I could not tell a myth about Lewis and Tolkien's friendship without a eucatastrophe. So I'm just going to say you'll have to read the book.
Thank you, John. I think we stayed on time, pretty close. And we're going to come up to the Q&R. Some more dialogue, discussion with you. Questions for John, questions for myself, questions for both of us. And I think, Madison, are you going to give us a little?
It's important that you change the A to an R. We do not have answers.
Yes, so we call it Q&R because it's question and response. Maybe takes a little pressure off the two of our speakers here. But this is the fun time because you get to come up, state your question. Please share your name, your year, and your major, or if you're staff, your position. And you get to grill them. So ask your hard questions, whatever deep questions you have about friendship. We're going to have a mic stand here. So we'll just start a line down the middle aisle right here. And to kick us off, Jordana has one of these burning questions.
Okay, so I've been listening to the questions, and hi, I'm Jordana. I'm a junior at Pepperdine studying natural science and physics. And okay, just from the professors, I'm hearing that there are a view and a bias towards a Christian-oriented friendship. Is that being a Christian, it shapes your worldview, and through your worldview, you conduct actions in the friendship that strengthens it. So, what if hypothetically there is a situation that you have a friend who honors all the qualities of Christian, for example, all the fruits of the Holy Spirit and clear communication and being abundance, but they're just not Christian, they're not saved by Jesus. What can be a difference between that type of friendship and a Christian friendship?
Well, I always think about it this way, that everything that is good and true and beautiful, God owns all those things. So we don't have to be anxious about determining how much is one versus the other. In fact, Jesus even says the weeds grow up with the wheat. And that seems to really be a challenge to our idea that we need to separate our friends out into sacred and secular, or do that with any aspect of our life. I think that tendency, which is very Western, of like some things are sacred, some things are secular. This is what, listen, I think the Enlightenment gave us a lot of nice things, but it also broke a lot of things too. And it disenchanted our hearts, basically. And so in some ways, I'm sorry, it always comes back to Lewis and Tolkien, but Lewis and Tolkien reminded us that we can re-enchant ourselves. And in some ways, you can bring that to friendships too. And you don't have to approach friendships with the anxiety of, is this enough? Is this one kind of thing or another?
Okay, would you mind be more specified with the idea of enchant? Yeah.
Okay, Lewis, I'm sorry. Lewis was obsessed with medieval cosmology, meaning that he loved the seven heavenly bodies of the medieval cosmos, right? Like the moon, Mars, Venus, Saturn, right? He thought that was a much easier way to make sense of the narrative of the universe than the, quote, real story, right? And he points out in several essays, like, actually, the thing you think is real right now is only real because we haven't discovered more information. So like we're all living in a sort of assumed reality about the world. And to him, the enchantment of the story, the to use a Greek word, the mythos, that was what grabbed him in the world. And that bigger story, that is what enchantment is to me. And Lewis called it the discarded image, right? There is something made, ordered, and shot through with meaning, and every single blade of grass has it.
Sounds
I
good.
don't think I answered the question.
Dr. Marshall, would you have anything to share?
I think, speaking for myself, the only person I can speak for, my worldview is a Christian worldview, but I don't think I have a bias towards Christians for friends, if that makes sense. So I'm not looking for friendships only with Christians, but the way I view and interpret and live my friendship comes from my perspective, which is a Christian perspective. I think in my own life, some of the times in which I've grown the most, I've been most fully aware of who I am as a friend and who God is through friendships with people who weren't Christians, right? Maybe they were believers of another faith. Maybe they were non-believers. I have had wonderful Zoroastrian friends. I've had wonderful Muslim friends. I've had wonderful Jewish friends. And I've had people who are agnostic or sort of seekers and wondering. And I think sometimes the tension, like you talked about tension in the Inklings or in the friendship with Lewis and Tolkien, sometimes the tension is amazing in those friendships because you're truly trying to understand one another. You're very open to listening and hearing and trying to understand why your friend, this person you care so deeply about, believes differently than you do. Because you do trust them, you admire them, you see something of great value and worth in them. So you want them to explain to you that piece, and you grow, right? And you also in turn have to explain to them why you believe what you believe. That's one piece, so I've grown a lot in that. But I also believe that Christ created us all, or that God created us all as children, and that these other humans have this amazing worth, this dignity, and that we are all seeking community. Whether they're seeking it with me on a spiritual level as another Christian, or they're just seeking it with me on a human level. And that is a tremendous moment to come to and realize that I can sit with someone and know that we believe very differently and yet are in community, true, real community, relationship with each other. Can I do a really quick story? When I was in graduate school, I dated a fellow who was from Lebanon. And he was Muslim, and he came to visit my family. And I remember, so my parents didn't grow up in the church, and my parents actually got baptized after I came to Pepperdine, which is, I think, a pretty incredible story. And anyway, so my Muslim boyfriend at the time comes, and he's staying at my parents' house with me, and there was a moment when he needed to pray, and so he asked my dad, which direction is Mecca? We're in Louisville, Kentucky. We don't know, right? And my dad, honestly, the effort to which my dad went to figure that out was so humbling to me in that moment. And that's what I mean about growth and sort of sacredness in seeing each other, right? And that's a memory I'll have forever of my parents and humility and the person I dated and this notion of just being in community and honesty with each other and sharing this moment. And it was really meaningful. And that moment would have never happened had I not been in a relationship with him. And so, yeah, I think we can grow tremendously from that.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah.
Hi, I think I managed to get to the front of the line.
You made it. You made it.
My name is Noah. I'm a sophomore. I study economics and international studies. I really was struck by the Wolverine shirt example from the beginning. When I think about friendship, there's something there that you mentioned about steadfastness and long-sufferingness, those things that I would probably class under unconditional love, at least under the Christian worldview. But there's also those parts of friendship that are kind of the Wolverine shirt or the shared Norse mythology. What place does conditional or unconditional love have in a strong friendship?
Yeah, I mean, you don't meet someone on campus and throw a Frisbee with them and be like, man, I just want to commit my life to being friends with you for the next, right? That's
forever.
I mean, maybe you know what? Maybe that happens. I'm not gonna put God in a box, but I think generally it starts with these shared loves, because the things we think about, the things that we do, those are, you can only. I tell this to my students all the time. You can only think about something for so long before it'll show up in your artwork. So, like where our heart and mind ruminates is, what our work is. Annie Dillard famously said, the way we spend our days is, of course, the way we spend our lives. So these tiny things that you do every day are actually who you are, right? So I don't think it's crazy at all that you start with Ultimate Frisbee and Wolverine and then realize that those shared connections allow you to take those leaps to deeper moments. I think that's healthy, yeah.
I think it probably relates to building trust, too. You do small things together. You do things that seem perhaps not so weighty, so meaning-laden. And then there's a lot that comes from just spending time together.
Well, and it's funny, I had a pastor tell me this, and it's not always true, but it was helpful to me, is that oftentimes when women are in friendships, they will sit down at a cafe and look at each other and talk. and that guys, they're often like, they want to be at a baseball game. They want to be shoulder to shoulder instead of face to face, right? So again, that's gendered. It's not always true. But I'm just saying for me, I don't think I have ever taken a friend out to coffee and talked, but we will go to Topgolf. We will go to a baseball game. Honestly, a road trip is awesome because there's an activity, there's music, you're both staring out the windshield, but you can talk, right? So, pro tip, go, don't look at your, yeah, it's fine. That says more about me than anything else, okay?
Thanks for your question, Noah.
Hi, my name is Julie. I work at the Hub for Spiritual Life here. And I'm wondering, thank you guys so much for being here. This is really a great talk.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm wondering what you think friendship looks like in a world where our developing dependency on technology and artificial intelligence, both for friendship and for our daily lives, is just becoming to look a lot more like friendship. Like our relationship with technology is growing a lot in just the amount of time we spend with it compared to the amount of time we spend with our friends. So.
Oh man, I don't have an answer for that. I think that's something that really is sad to me and scary, and I think all of us have to acknowledge our own sort of phone guilt, but also that like these things are designed to be visually addictive. So on some level, you can't blame yourself. I think it goes back to intentionality, set times and, make sure you're going places where you're going to sit at a cafe, you're going to go hang out with someone, and you're going to play a board game, and the phone is going to sit over there. I don't think there's any way around it. You're not going to accidentally not look at your phone. It's designed to do the opposite. But
I think your point about intentionality is probably more important than anything with this topic. I also think we have to realize technology can be a great tool, right? And think about the way we can, the word they always use, leverage. But how can you use technology to grow our friendship? In what ways might it serve us instead of us being served, through technology, right? How can we implement technology to grow in a friendship as opposed to substitute technology or AI for relationships? And I think we enjoy technology because, like you said, there's an addictive element to it. And we all had that moment in COVID, right? When all we had was technology. And that's a hard moment to draw ourselves away from. Although someone pointed out to me today, we're 5 years past COVID. That seems incredible. 5 years already, right? And so to be in that moment and remember the gratitude about being able to do things in person, right? That technology isn't our only way to communicate with each other or to be face-to-face, quote unquote, and take advantage of that, to know that that's a blessing, that's a privilege, that it could be taken away, right?
And one last bit. I think use technology to make something together. Like this is something I've done with my kids. We do Star Wars fan videos together. And it is a way to engage technology where you are actually making something. So, okay.
That's a great point.
Hello, my name is Gabriel France Ferguson. I am a rising sophomore, and I'm also a physics major. I resonated extremely deeply when you discussed that Tolkien met Lewis over a shared fandom, that being Norse mythology. How do you balance in a friendship discussing things and information and facts and topics and actually discussing the other person? Like, how do you balance between?
Okay, this is a great question. I have no answers for you, but I will tell you, okay, just as an example, Lewis, after they got to know each other right at the beginning, Tolkien had been writing basically the early portions of the Silmarillion. He had written this story called The Lay of Lúthien about Beren and Lúthien. Like, it's like the core of the Silmarillion. It's a romance. This was extremely vulnerable. He gave it to Lewis to read. He's like, hey, you know what? I've been writing this story. I don't know if you want to read it. Lewis read it and wrote a 14-page commentary, right? This was from that moment, they were friends basically for life, right? So what I'm saying is, go deep on the stuff that you're interested in. I would not worry about that. I think the other stuff will come because when you're invested in something together, you can't help but have pieces of yourself be shared. So I understand the fear of like, when do we stop talking about Magic the Gathering or whatever, or Pokemon? But you know, that is not. I don't think actually that's something you have to worry about too much. But great question. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joyce Kim. I'm a senior. I'm an English education major. If I may, I do have two questions. One, I would be super interested to hear how your profession or your field of study, how or if that has influenced or impacted the way in which you navigate or view relationships, whether it enriched it, complicated it in any way. And my second question, I guess it's a little bit more subjective, but still something that I think about often, I think, especially in recent times. Navigating relationships or like friendships with someone of the opposite gender, whether that be like strictly platonic or like going towards like romantic, and like how do you navigate those kind of boundaries, relationships, etc. Yes.
Oh, I wish we had a therapist up here. Oh my! I went to art school. Do you want to take? Do you remember the first one? You want to take that one?
Yes, I can take the first one. Yeah. So my profession, my field of study, and how it's influenced my relationships. This I have a great answer for. So I teach Hispanic studies, which includes the Spanish language. So my world has been opened up to a whole new realm of friends because I can speak a different language, right? That is a shameless promotion of languages. But it's true. It's absolutely true. And so when I travel, I can engage with people in different ways than I could if I didn't speak Spanish. And it has been a joy when people realize that I can speak to them in their language versus my language. So that has been huge. It has enriched my life tremendously, beyond measure. It has helped shape who I am. It has helped shape what I understand about the world around me. And it's helped me meet other people, for sure. And then sharing that as a professor has been wonderful, too. And being able to offer that out to others and hope that they will, in turn, make more friends. And maybe the world, just maybe the world will be a better place because I taught Spanish somewhere, somehow. But it does. It's the idea of a language. But also, I teach literature and culture and reading. I mean, look at what we're talking about here. All the literature, all our great book students here, people in English. But what John has done, the way in which you can share the lives and your imagination with others and open that up through literature and culture, has been astounding as well.
Normalize book clubs. Yeah, that's what you can do with friends of the opposite sex. Book clubs. I always had more. I had more girls that were friends in high school than boys, mostly because I was an artist. I was in theater. Like, none of the dudes from the football team wanted to hang out with me, right? So, you know, and eventually you find a few guys that, like, actually, if you've ever seen the show Freaks and Geeks, there's an amazing sequence at the end where these just nerds have been playing D&D their whole like life together, and then at the very end, the most popular kid in school, James Franco, actually like secretly loves D&D and plays with them. And this was like the revelation of their whole high school was this moment. And that happened to me. We had this popular kid that played D&D with us, and we would not talk at school, but he would come to the D&D session. Anyway.
That's what you got for that?
That's all. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, how about you try? That was terrible.
Okay. That's a hard question, right? And that's probably a perennial question from ages long before John and I were here, long before Lewis and Tolkien were here, right? The gender and those either platonic or romantic and what happens and where are the lines and borders. But I would say something holds true for that holds true in all friendships, which is honesty. I think honesty is a big piece of trying to navigate those. And I think it's a big piece of any friendship. And when I say honesty, I mean honesty between the people in the friendship, but I think also honesty for yourself.
Well, and in the now ancient movie, When Harry Met Sally, popularized the idea that men and women cannot be friends. And that's another one of those cultural liturgies that I think is just wrong. So I wouldn't be scared of that. What other question will we not answer?
Hi, my name is Leo Hawk. I'm a junior, and I'm a Spanish and International Studies major. And I'm wondering, I guess, I think this was touched on a little bit by Dr. Marshall, kind of with the idea of having different beliefs. But in a increasingly polar political climate, I think kind of what that has translated to often is because I believe something different than you, that comes off as almost like a direct insult to someone else. So I'm wondering how do you navigate that in relating to other people kind of in an open way when not everyone is necessarily open to doing that as well.
I think this is the number one friendship problem of our time, frankly. Like, I think this is so pressing. Everyone could probably think of moments where this has come up in friendships or new relationships where it's like, oh, I thought we were on the same team. We're not on the same team, you know? So I just think we should normalize imagining that we might be wrong, right? Like, every day that you feel some strong belief, like a practice of humility to say, I think I'm right about this, but it is very probable that I could be wrong. And to normalize saying, I don't know enough about this to have an opinion. It's another problem we have as a society. I think it is great to have friends that are very different than you. If that challenges you, I mean, there are, of course, you need to protect yourself, you need to be responsible. Some people you just need to be not around. But the idea that you could be in fellowship with people that you don't agree with 100%, it's kind of the idea of the church, actually. Like, that should be more normal to us. But in America, we've all sorted ourselves in denomination and political parties, so there's a lot less opportunity for that.
I would second what John said about that's the ideal of the church. And I think that's the ideal of Christ, certainly. I think you've brought up a quandary, Leo, right? Like that is where we are. That's where so many of us sit right now and are hurt or worried or anxious about a conversation. And not just with friends, but with family. Families, there are divisions in families because of these issues and these questions. And I wonder, international studies student, right? I wonder, and you mentioned here, I wonder, is that something unique to the United States, right? In this moment, maybe not forever, are we particularly polarized? Are we particularly divided? Are we particularly sensitive? And if so, what lessons can we learn from other cultures? What lessons can we learn from other nations? What lessons can we learn, right? That's a question. I think also when you started to talk, the first word that came to my mind was humility. And you went through what you said about humility there and imagining the possibility of being wrong. I think also to imagine the possibility that your knowledge is partial, that you are limited by all sorts of things. Your age, your moment in time, meaning historically, where you've been, what you've seen, what you've read, what you haven't seen, what you haven't read, and that perhaps the person with whom you're speaking has an experience so distinct from yours that has brought them to this moment, to what they believe, that it's worth listening to them about that, and thinking, well, now that I see where they're coming from, what they're saying, though I may not believe it, seems to make a lot of sense from their point of view, right? I'm not trying to be convinced of it, but I can say I see how they got from A to B to C to D. And I think that's a big thing, and I think that's a hard thing to do as a human.
Mm-hmm. And I have a theory that the dating apps are turning our brains into, like, what categories are you? You know, just the, like, you're a collection of position papers. I need to, like, know the list of them before I can even continue on to the next, you know, to make it to the final boss. You got to make through all of these stages. And that is not how relationships are supposed to start, you know? Yeah.
No. And I'll also say, I think, and I've said this in class before, but I think that we in Western society, and this may go back to what you said about the Enlightenment, right? Continuing our dialogue, what the Enlightenment brought us. We are so scared of saying we're ignorant, right? We feel like that's a negative, right? But ignorant is really just an objective statement. It simply means I have no knowledge of X, right? We're all ignorant of a lot of stuff because we're human, right? We're finite beings with so much time and energy and what we studied. We can't know it all.
And we are great examples of this, answering questions about relationships with an artist and a linguist. Okay.
Right? But to say that we're ignorant, no, you're right. To say that we're ignorant, like, what a place to begin, right? What a place to begin to say, John, I really know nothing about writing a graphic novel. I know zero about that.
I feel like that too.
Right, but I think that stance, as opposed to I know, right, is a very different stance and opens up those conversations a little bit. So, yeah. Next question we won't answer. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Christine Espinosa, and I'm a senior majoring in business with a minor in religion. I was thinking a lot about what you said, especially what caught my attention was when you said you broke up with your girlfriend 3 times, and then you ended up getting married, and you guys have been married for 25 years, correct? Yeah, and I've just been thinking about that, and you talked about like the enchantment of a different age and that we've lost that in the Enlightenment. The whole idea of romantic relationships is supposed to be this idea of romance, which is like enchantment, but you also described friendship, like the word that you used is the long suffering and the steadfastness through what you said feels like a mess and can be a mess every day. So I guess my question is, having gone through this experience, and I know you said you're not a therapist or an expert, but I would say that you have, specific and you have knowledge about this, but having been married for 25 years, how did you get through that? Like those breakups, how did you decide like this was the person for you? How did you come back? And how do you get through that feeling of like, I don't like being like doing this, or I don't like being in this relationship. It's not what I romanticize or like this enchantment that I thought it would be.
I wish my wife, Andrea, was here so bad. This is a really good question. Here's what I will say. I think that being a young person right now is really, really challenging. I think you all have a real narrative crisis. It's something I'm going to tell you that's bad news, but you have to get through it because it's actually good news. Because I tell this to my students all the time. Your 20s are terrible, okay? Everyone, honestly, everyone tells you they're supposed to be awesome, and you like look at Taylor Swift or whoever. I don't know. She's not even in her 20s anymore. But the idea that like she was writing a song literally called 22, and she was a millionaire at the time. Okay, you have no career, like you have no money, you have no cultural power, like you don't own a house, like all these things are really hard in your 20s. And then you graduate and you enter the world and you lose the great community of college, right? These are really hard things. These will be the hardest years. In my opinion, my career right after college was really difficult, but you get through it. You build community. Your first job is terrible. But guess what? The second one is so much better. Your first job you ever get will be the worst one of your life, and that is normal. Okay, so I want you to normalize struggle. Struggle is not proof that you have made the wrong choice. Struggle is learning. And thank you. And I say this to artists because artists have this feedback loop of they come up with an idea. As soon as they try to make it real, the drawing, the idea, the book, the story is terrible. And they think that that means they had a bad idea. So then they start over. They're like, I need a better idea. No. What you're experiencing is what I call the pit of despair. And it happens with every project. You have to go through the pit of despair. The only way out is long suffering. You have to work to slowly write, draw, compose your way out of the pit of despair. And the only way we make good things, for some reason, good art resists being made. I don't know why this is. It does. It does not want to exist. You have to fight for it to exist. And it's the same in relationships. Everything that will be valuable in your life will require pain. And that stinks. Nobody on Instagram wants to tell you that. But if you can suffer well, and that's what actually Christianity is about. It is not about alleviating suffering, it is learning to suffer well. Suffering well is how we get all the blessings of our life, believe it or not, even even in graphic novels.
Amen. I would agree with John, and I'm not married. And I think part of long suffering is also realizing that generally speaking, right, we're generalizing it, but there's going to be another side. You're going to get through to the other side, right? Whether it's the art, whether it's the relationship, whether it's the degree, right? Whether it's the test, right? There is another side, which is ultimately also the story of Christianity, right? The new earth, but that it is just for a season and that it will not last forever. And you will be different on the other side, and that different will be a lesson learned. It will be something accomplished. It will be having moved through and being able to say, even if nothing else, I moved through that. And I think one of the beauties of friendship, since we're talking about that, is you have people with you, right? And that's in this marriage, but there are people with you, alongside you, people to support you, people to listen to you, people to lean on, people that are willing to walk with you and bear your burdens. And that helps. That really does help. It doesn't make it easy, like you said. It doesn't make it stink less, right? It doesn't, but it helps, right? And then part of those relationships are later you look back on those things together. You can think about the lessons learned. You can think about the way in which you persevered. And ultimately, and this is one of the great lessons I think in my life, I think sometimes you suffer through something and then you meet someone who's having the same suffering, and the way in which you can be present for that person is beyond measure beautiful, right? To say, I know what you're feeling. I did this. I walked through this. I was really literally in your same place has so much meaning. That notion of empathy, I think, is wonderful. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Liam. I'm a freshman who studies psych. And I was just wondering, I was really struck by...
You should be up here, Liam, giving these answers, right? Like,
No.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, I was really struck by how you were talking about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's relationship and how it was rocky, and like through all those years they still stuck together, even though like they had their struggles. And I was wondering, when do you walk away from a relationship that isn't healthy for you, or a friendship, and how do you do that? How do you cope with feeling the guilt and just, feelings like that?
Don't look at me, John. You want to go?
I mean, my wife is a therapist, and I say we should all go to therapy. Everyone can benefit from therapy. I don't win any arguments anymore, but she went to get her master's in counseling over COVID, and so I think actually one of the things I've seen in young people, I get a lot of young college students in my office, and having healthy boundaries is really important, but also not weaponizing the language of therapy to somehow protect yourself from all possible injury in life. I think that's also one of the dangers of being so worried about being hurt that you prevent yourself from actually living life. Lewis talked about this, that the one way that you will never experience heartbreak in the world is to never love. And that's a dangerous place that unfortunately our technology makes pretty easy to isolate yourself away from the pain that is inevitable in all good relationships. I think actually that's important to say, that pain, heartbreak, argument, breaking up on Christmas will be part of every healthy relationship.
Liam, I think that's a great question. And I think it's a hard question. I think, again, we talked about honesty, accountability. I think trying to maintain those through a relationship will help with that moment. I think also, as John said, there are hard times, there are struggles, there are disappointments in friendships. And I think you have to be honest with yourself about those and honest with the friend. I think communication is a great, it's both a result of friendship and a needed quality in a friendship, right? And I think communication helps with that. But I think sometimes we do reach that point in different relationships.
There's an amazing book called How to Stay Married. I know it sounds like a how-to book. It's a memoir by Harrison Scott Key that is hilarious somehow, but just is about the story of long suffering he had with his wife after she had an affair and wanted to leave, and he fought for them. And it is really, it's an astonishing book. It's funny, and yeah, it's a really great read.
I would say, Liam, the ultimate response I have is to try and be, if you decide it's time, if you have those feelings, those questions, you've struggled through that, you've discerned, to do that with love, right? Because that should be the basis of the friendship, and even the end of the friendship should be done with love, to try and, to try and maintain whatever goodness has come from it, to not destroy that in the separation, if that makes sense. And that's an easy thing to say, do it with love. What that looks like is a harder practice, I think. Yeah.
We're just going to take one more question, and then everyone else afterwards, if you have a short question you want to just fire, then prepare those.
This better be good.
No pressure.
Okay, my name is Anastasia Grechkina, and I'm a freshman majoring in business administration. And so here's my thought about honesty. So what do you think? Do you need to be 100% honest every time in every situation, even knowing that this honest truth will hurt your friend?
This is the word that no one, like, it's not romantic, but like discernment, right? Discernment is really important, and it's actually really important in the Christian life. And it's like cousin is wisdom. And unfortunately, wisdom usually only comes with a lot of bad experiences. So again, it seems like I have a theme here that like things are going to go poorly for you. But discernment in that situation, we all know there are times when, like for instance, I'm an art teacher. People pin work up on the wall that they've spent a long time working on. And one of the things you have to do in art school early on is teach people that they are not their work. They are making something that is not them. We can talk about that thing they made and not be talking about their personhood. But it is, in practice, really hard to separate those things. So there are times when I see a piece on the wall when there are 200 things that are wrong with it, right? I cannot go through all of them for the sake of this young artist's heart. So you pick the thing that is going to help them the most in that moment. Not because I'm going to make the piece better, but they need just that little thing to be able to take the next step of growth. And so that is a form of discernment. And I think when you are with friends, there is that moment too, where you're like, I am going to be thoughtful. I'm going to be loving. And remember, loving in this, for the sake of a Christian, is a cruciform shape. It takes the form of the cross. It is self-sacrificial. That is how you approach honesty, I think, is with discernment.
Thank you so much, guys, for all your questions. Yes, round of applause, round of applause. Excellent questions and responses. Yes, one question I see.
Well, that's a great question. A lot of adults read this book and learn from it. I write for middle grade audiences basically because publishing wants to sell books, and they need a space that you're writing to. And so I write to a middle grade audience, one, because right now, you may not know it, but graphic novels for middle graders are like huge, right? And so basically every publisher wants to have something in that space. But, you know, honestly, I really write for like really smart 13-year-olds. So if you are a 13-year-old and think of yourself as a really advanced reader, you're going to love this book. No, that's a very good question.
Yes. You.
Who's a better writer, Lewis or Tolkien?
if you gave me like their catalogs on a desert island, I mean, I'd probably go Lewis. I am more like him in temperament, so I tend to resonate with his view of the world. But in terms of pure prose, like there are passages in Lord of the Rings that I cannot get through without weeping. So I think just pure prose, it's probably Tolkien by a hair.
Okay. If we're done with questions, then a big round of applause to our speakers, please. Thank you, John Hendrix. And before you guys leave, we do have a few announcements we'd like to make. Tomorrow, can we get this slide? Yes. So tomorrow, if you loved what you got today, you can get even more close to John Hendrix tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. in the Surfboard Room, where you are going to explore why and how illustration matters theologically.
We're
and
going
as
to
an
draw.
we're going to draw.
We're going to draw.
And as an expression of our humanity. Also, please get the book Myth Makers outside in the foyer, and you can get it signed tomorrow at the workshop. Also, please join Veritas Club every Monday at 6 p.m. in PLC 157. We're going to have a continuation of this discussion, our next meeting, so do make sure to join us. And last but not least, join us for a dessert reception outside of Elkins right now. And give yourself one more round of applause. And survey. Oh, one more survey. It's very important. Very important. 1 minute of your time to fill out the survey so we know how we can do better. And you can win a $50 Amazon gift card.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.